What's up, everybody? It's your boy. Never forget that Quentin Tarantino wrote and directed a movie in which a character sucks on Selma Hayek's toes and then cast himself in that role, aka Reed from Shameless Nerd. There exists in my brain the perfect chemical cocktail spritzed with just enough childhood trauma and subtle neurodivergence and a little genetic misfortune to make my relationships with various unhealthy substances and unhealthy habits very complicated. I have a naturally very addictive personality. I have that very fun flavor of hyperfixation in which I'm just laser focused on the same thing forever. Shout out Pokemon and farm type video games and salty foods. And I have, as mentioned plenty of times on this channel already, really struggled with pretty severe anxiety in several different manifestations throughout my adolescent and adult life. I'm also a pretty voracious reader and researcher. I like learning everything there is to know about every little thing that sparks my interest. I like thinking very deeply about mundane or even inane things. I'm someone who has to know the best way to do something all the time. I'm super interested in and studied in philosophy, research into epistemology. Why do we think what we think? How do we know what we know and don't know, etc.? And finally, I have been obsessed with, terrified of, and unsatisfied with, frankly, the very premise of death and dying for a very long time. This combination of personal qualities, these certain realities about myself, make certain aspects of consumption that are inevitable in being a human very difficult. So to begin to distinguish what I'm talking about specifically in this video, I'm gonna need to start broadly, start big, and then narrow it all the way down to Diet Coke. First of all, this video is more so about habitual behaviors than truly addictive behaviors. Like, I'll touch on addiction a little bit, but that's more tangential to what I'm trying to get at today than it is central to my point. This video is about compulsion, moderation, ways to try to find balance in our modern lives, which I've found effective personally, the power we give to our various anxieties, and a prioritization of quality of life for the tiny little amount of life that we have. So, broadly speaking, to start, what do you want from your life? What is its purpose? I'm not talking what is the meaning of life, because that's obviously very simple, and the answer is to catch all 1,164 Pokemon. I'm talking about which version of yourself are you trying to serve. I'll do a full video on this concept later, but there are at least 3 yous within you. You have the experiential self, the you that's tasting the milkshake you're drinking, the you that feels angry when the guy in front of you with the Punisher sticker and the coexist sticker on his car, that's interesting, cuts you off in traffic. You have the persona, or the public-facing self, the reactionary self is my personal term for it that I like a little bit better. The you that swallows his pride and doesn't cuss and scream when this guy cuts you off because you worked really hard on not being a poor example for your 3-year-old son in the backseat, especially because he did just get in trouble for saying the F word at daycare the other day, so you need to be more careful. And you have the narrative self. This is the you that lies in bed at the end of the night and thinks, man, do I really even care if my son says the F word? Like, do I need to be concerned about that? It's just a word, right? Isn't it kind of somebody else's problem if they're upset by hearing it, and as long as he knows not to say it at school or whatever, then, like, should I teach him you can say it at home but not at school? Is that viable? Am I a good person? Am I insane? And then you hyperfixate on death for the next 30 minutes before anxiously drifting into the state of half-sleep that you've grown so familiar with. These 3 selves inside you each want something different, and who am I to say which one I feed? Am I even in charge? And which I am I? Which one is most important? I'm waiting for an answer because I don't know. My point is that step 1 is definitely to at least approach these thoughts. I guess I would argue you prioritize your narrative self here and think about the person that you want to be. What kind of person is that? And what are the things that are important to this idealized future version of yourself? And then you can try to base your decision making on trying to serve that version of you. Because what I'm talking about in this video is vices. Vices, definitionally speaking, and massively simplifying a super convoluted idea because there's no reason to go into all that right now, are just the opposite of virtues. This concept was introduced by the great Stoic thinkers of the 300s BC or so and refined over the years, and essentially, and again, simplifying for the sake of this video, don't come for me, philosophy YouTube, virtue is the essence of goodness. More specifically, in this context, the essence of things that are good for mankind. You can extend this to mean things that are good for you, and Stoics believe that no one did evil on purpose. Humans only do wrong because they are misguided, and in the moment they think it would be good for them, or they're trading temporary satisfaction for true virtue, something like that. Basically, vices are things that are bad in this Stoic context where no one would knowingly do bad things. So definitionally then, vices are things that we know are bad for us. And now we can start to get where we're going. Based on what I said about 40 seconds ago, if we are prioritizing our narrative, idealized, future, sort of actualized version of ourselves, it would stand to reason that we should pursue virtue and avoid any vices, obviously, because we know that vices are bad for us, and we're pursuing a version of ourselves that's awesome and good. And unless we're some weird cartoon supervillain stroking a waxed mustache, the best version of ourselves is probably good. And this was my problem. I obsessed over this concept. I was suffering for so long, I was so deep in my depression and my anxiety, which I'll get to in a second, and my trauma, and I wanted to get better. I wanted to become this idealized narrative self-based self that we're talking about, and so I obsessed over my vices. I used to do things that I'm not going to mention here. I was very lazy and lethargic and full of self-pity. I smoked cigarettes in college. I ate nothing but fast food because, God, I love French fries. Like, I love French fries. It's not just like, oh yeah, fries are good. Like you don't understand. You could never comprehend how much I love French fries. I gained a bunch of weight. Like, I think at my peak I weighed like 215 or so, which doesn't seem huge, and it's not, but I have a pretty compact frame. I'm not the tallest guy in the world either, so 215 is way big for me. Like, I think I weigh 145 right now. I was constantly on my phone, doom scrolling garbage social media and watching trash TV and playing mindless multiplayer rage bait video games, another video I'll do in the future. I drank a lot. I skipped classes in college and then was late for work when I barely graduated and started working. I had a ton of very obvious, very apparent, very easy to spot vices. And so I started obsessing over eliminating them. I stopped smoking and started vaping. Well, congratulations, Reed, you've traded the color blue for the color light blue. But I started obsessing over getting back in shape. I started counting calories and stopped eating McDonald's. I exercised. I stopped sitting on the couch all day doing nothing. I stopped watching low-tier trash on TV. I started reading books instead of playing Fortnite. I stopped drinking Diet Coke. And guess what? I felt worse. My anxiety got worse. I began to obsess over my weight. I started obsessing compulsively over my heart rate. I would get panicky every time I hit my vape, but I was too anxious about nicotine withdrawals to quit nicotine. I developed an eating disorder and would make myself throw up. I ruined my then relationship. I alienated my friends. My grades got worse. Because all I had done was trade my vices for better sounding vices. I wasn't pursuing virtue. I was still a slave to my vices. They were just different ones. Compulsive weight watching, pulse checking, vaping, binging and purging, self-isolation, these aren't good things. I didn't address any of the feelings I was having, any of the self-hate, insecurity, any of the relationships I had to these things I was so afraid of. I just went from one extreme to the other, and within a short amount of time, I began to look healthier and feel worse. And every time someone would say, "Damn, Reed, you're looking good, man, you look healthy," I would look at them through these exhausted, deeply miserable, scared eyes and hate myself more. And after a full-scale mental breakdown and revival, the story for which I'll save for another time, I proved to myself a central principle I've held sacred ever since and will hold sacred for the rest of my life, which is that extremity is the enemy. Extremity is the enemy. Nothing good exists on either end of the spectrum, any spectrum. I don't know what this principle is. I don't know what to call it. I just know it to be true. Water is good for you. Well, guess what? If you try to drink 10 gallons of water, you'll die. Sugar is bad for you. Well, if you consume no sugar and your body stopped converting carbs into sugar, you would die. There are a few exceptions to this rule, I guess. Like, obviously, you probably shouldn't do any heroin, but even like air. If you breathe too much air, you'll hyperventilate and have a panic attack. Thank you to my therapist for helping me with that one. To exist is to find balance. This has been known for millennia. The Chinese principle of yin and yang, that good exists in all bad and bad exists in all good, again, oversimplifying, has existed since at least the 3rd century BC. Plato discussed moderation. Aristotle considered it a moral virtue. There's that word again. The 4th most popular religion on the planet is based almost entirely on the principle of the middle path, which is all about avoiding extremes. I couldn't fix my unhealthy vices that existed on the far end of the spectrum by replacing them with vices that existed on the other end of that same spectrum. That's crazy. The answer, as it unfortunately does with everything, lies somewhere in the middle. And this is not entirely anecdotal evidence. There's a wealth of research that backs this idea. For example, a 2021 study at Fudan University in China, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, showed that consuming a virtue, like participating in something maybe not super fun, but that you know is good for you, increases palatability if consumed after consuming a vice. And even more interestingly, that this correlation disappears, quote, when people have no strong goals that the vice violates, when the vice is perceived as less vicious, when the vice and the virtue serve unrelated goals, and when the vice and virtue are perceived as isolated. In other words, doing something a little cheeky that you know is maybe not great for you before doing the thing you reluctantly know is good for you works. And earning a treat for doing something good doesn't. And further, it only works when the vice and the virtue are related. In other words, if you want to go to the gym, maybe let yourself eat a piece of chocolate first. The reason moderation is important here is not because it's good to smoke a cigarette, but because in extremity lives shame. And shame is one of the most dramatically demotivating forces that there is. There is a wealth of research on this, but I'll link to one study from Georgetown University. Telling yourself you shouldn't do something ever without exception because it's bad for you, that makes you feel bad, even if you don't do it because you want to. And that shame makes it even harder to A, not do the thing, and B, to do the thing that's good for you. Further, allowing yourself a vice or two or three, depending on what they are, makes it easier to give up the other ones. And in doing so, you're still progressing toward that narrative self-based version of you. If I smoke, drink, eat at Burger King every day, and all night, every night, I play one of those terrible gambling, evil phone games that so many YouTubers peddle to their adolescent audiences just shamelessly, and then all of a sudden, I stop smoking, and I play Stardew Valley every night instead, that's a major success. That is a huge step in the right direction. And then inertia begins. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion, that whole thing. This is one of those things that for some people I know isn't going to work. And I'm sure I'll get a few angry comments about how cutting back didn't work for them and they had to quit cold turkey. I know that there are recovering addicts for which this advice would certainly not work. People that know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can't have just one beer or whatever, and that's absolutely valid. I'm that way with tobacco. I like the idea of smoking a cigar on a special occasion, but I just know that if I do, I'll be buying Newports with nickels and dimes at 3 a.m. within 3 weeks. So that's valid too. But for me, in general, the idea of moderation, of allowing myself grace in making progress, of being cautious about drifting too far to one extreme or the other, that's an idea that I just don't hear a lot of people discussing, and one that literally saved my life. Sometimes you can pretty effectively trade one really bad vice for one that's not quite as bad, and that's helpful. That's a positive step. A lot of tiny steps in the right direction will get you further than jumping really far in the right direction, falling down, and getting a boo-boo on your leg. There's also a ton of fun anecdotal evidence for this idea of moderation, of letting yourself have a vice, like the extremely cute and famous story about Elizabeth Sullivan, who lived to be 106, attributing her longevity, saying the very secret to living so long was that she drank one ice-cold can of Dr. Pepper every day. Or the great Lorna Goby, the British lady who lived to be 100 and gave all of the credit to smoking. Quote, "I like my smokes, a drop of whiskey and a Guinness, and I still love to play Skittles. Perhaps it's part of the reason I've lived for so long." I don't know if that's what she sounded like, but I just wanted to do the accent really bad. And of course, this isn't true, so to speak, but I do think there is some level of value in the idea that letting yourself enjoy things in moderation is good. Stress is very bad for you. This is becoming increasingly apparent the more it gets studied. Another fun rabbit hole to go down. And as of right now, it's pretty hard to say what's worse for you, partaking in your vices in moderation and letting yourself live without shame and guilt and the resulting stress for it, or running 6 miles every day but hiring a little guy to follow you around and slap you in the mouth every time you touch a piece of candy, although it does sound funny. For me, after my breakdown, and it was a true breakdown, maybe I'll share that story one day, I actually started with a clean slate, and I reintroduced my vices in isolation, performing an experiment on myself. For a while, I went full shame mode, and I lost all the weight. I got in shape. I eventually quit vaping too. I read every self-help book. I ate healthy. I told myself, bad dog, every time I looked longingly at the Arby's sign. But I was miserable. So I took that extremity I was living in, and like a giant disgusting petri dish, I exposed myself to variables and observed how they affected me. I stayed strict about my exercise, but I took 2 days off a week to work on music or play video games or watch Peaky Blinders. I anxiously terrified, like a weirdo, like that it was going to kill me, that I would have the same hangover anxiety that gave me a panic attack that hospitalized me, drank a glass of red wine. And then 2 weeks later, I drank 2 glasses of red wine. And then I overdid it a little bit one night, and I woke up with a headache in the middle of the night like I was afraid of, but I had the tools and the mentality to manage it like a normal person. I got up and I peed and I drank the infamous bedside table 2 a.m. glass of water and I went back to bed because I'd gotten over the shame that consumed me. I've learned to let myself enjoy some things sometimes. The narrative, self-serving person I want to be in the future isn't just old. He's not just a guy who lived to die really old by abstaining from every single unhealthy substance and behavior during his dull, sad, lonely life. He's a guy who experienced life, who traveled and participated and loved and tried new things and felt feelings. A guy who didn't waste every Saturday night avoiding watching football with his friends to instead go on a run and then journal about it all night. He's a guy that might know the name and type of every Pokemon, but he didn't spend every waking second studying for some Pokemon knowledge test that would never come. He didn't even play Scarlet and Violet yet, and you know what? He doesn't even want to. He's a guy that was productive and dedicated to his career, but he didn't miss his son's baseball games. He's a guy that maybe didn't smoke cigarettes, but he did drink Diet Coke. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.